here a few more minutes if you are interested to take photographs. And then we shall go back to the coaches. I'm glad I have a little background that helps. Oh, yes. You have to
Greece, with columns.
Just in the valley between the hills.
The Greece of the history books and the Sunday supplements. Our Greece.
Better to take your sweaters with you. It's very windy in the Kolones.
For 500,000 tourists every year, this is Greece.
On the left we found large Octavian, 2nd century AD.
Deutsche Führer books, eine Karten, Postkarten, eine Dias, Postkarten, color slides, Greek stamps collection.
Somebody has got to kill themselves if you don't take it.
We are sitting on the remains of the first stone temple that was built on the Acropolis. This goes back to the early part of the 6th century BC.
Among the ruins you can see at the center the very elaborate throne of the priest of Dionysus from Eleftheres.
Many of these sculptures can be seen today in the British Museum.
Does it annoy you that so much of Greece is in the British Museum?
No, well, now you're trying to pinpoint me. Well, the thing is that you can say that those things over there have been seen by the world. Well, I would love to see even a few things back.
Greek archaeologists are planning to remove all those statues now. They will put them in a museum. They are planning to replace them by some plaster reproductions because often people are carving their names.
We've had invasions since Alexander the Great, the Romans, Byzantines, then the Franks, then the Turks. 400 years the Turks were here. We have always been in the middle of things. The Greek War of Independence started. That's when things started looking up for Greece.
But did they? While the visitors come to hear the old story, the Greeks leave their country in search of a new one. People have become the country's biggest export. Partings are its perpetual sorrow. 100,000 left last year, 90,000 the year before, 85,000 the year before that. Young people. This year, perhaps, there'll be another 100,000. In 10 years' time, at this rate, an entire generation of youth will have gone from Greece. This, too, is an old Greek story. The story of farewell. Once, the Greek emigrants went to America. Now it's Germany, Australia, South Africa. Wherever there's the opportunity they can't find at home. There are 150,000 now in West Germany alone, working for good money in the factories of Munich, Frankfurt and the Ruhr. In the villages they leave behind, the old ways continue. The old people and the very young remain. But among them, the absent emigrants leave a constant reminder of another wealthier world elsewhere, tempting their remaining friends. I'm going to Germany too, he says. There's nothing for me here. Year after year, the long farewell continues, often as final as death itself. In a way, perhaps it is death, for the dispersal of a country's youth is the death of its hope. To us, Greece is a land of beauty, happy in its aspect, legendary in its sunlight, splendid in its ruins. To most Greek peasants, these ruins might as well be on the moon. They don't want to leave, But you can't live forever on history, or even on sunshine. To the Greeks, this is a land of poverty. The rocks that reflect that marvelous Greek light and made those marvelous ruins grow few marvelous crops. This is a back-breaking land, where every man's his own Sisyphus, doomed forever to push his burden up the hill, but never to reach the top. Only a quarter of the Greek land can bear any crop at all, and many a peasant is lucky if he makes 50 pounds a year. Without the tough old olive tree, he wouldn't make even that. For the tourists, Greece has new motor roads. But for most Greeks, the goat is more important than the car. 15 years ago, there was hardly a single modern motor road in the country. Now there are many. But still, this track in the Pindus Mountains is the only all-weather road from east to west in the northern half of the country. And when the rains fall on these bare mountainsides, all weather seems a pretty optimistic description. For 3 years, they've been trying to make this a proper motor road. The bulldozers and the men work round the year and sometimes round the clock. But as fast as they widen it, smooth it and surface it, the erosion carries some of it away again. This year, next year, or sometime maybe, they'll get this road finished. But dozens of others will remain unmade, and many isolated villages will still be forced to live at the mercy of the mountains and the weather. Now, where the new roads reach the villages, they promise a new life, but the habits of isolation persist. Every night, all over the country, like Yanina here in northern Greece, the people turn out for a stroll in the main street. They've always done it. It's part of the daily shape of rural life, and there's nothing else to do. When they knew no other life, it was probably fun. Now, for the young people, it's become boredom walk in every little town in Greece, until the cinema opens, with its tempting vision of that other world again. The new world beckons, and the new bus gets you there. The villages that are left behind sink deeper into loneliness and boredom. Their old life is being destroyed. The new life only confirms their isolation.
Άμα θες να κλάψεις, κλάψε, να γκρινιάζεις μόνο πάψε, δεν μπορώ να δαμετώ. Άμα θες να φύγεις, φύγε, στο βαγγέ στο ξαναλέω, μη μου πεις μετά πως θέω, όταν μάλλη θα βλέπω.
Far away in Athens, or maybe Rome or Munich, there's a football match. In the village, there's nothing. Always the fun is somewhere else, and the radio never lets you forget it. Here there isn't even work to keep you occupied. In the villages there are always 2 people for every job. You can almost hear the booming silence of death. Greece has also acquired the glory of heroism. This was the last frontier of Europe against what the Greeks called the barbarians. Here was the last stand against Islam, the last stand of the Eastern Christian Church. This was a land of heroes, the teachers tell the children, from the Spartans 2,500 years ago, holding back the Persians at Thermopylae, to Kolokotronis, the hero of independence, driving out the hated Turks only 100 years ago. Ochi, no, the Greeks told Mussolini in 1940. And no, they said again to the Germans in 1941. But through 4 years of battle and enemy occupation in the Second World War, they suffered death and fearful destruction. When the liberation came and the Germans left, the Greeks, piling tragedy upon tragedy, fought each other. Their civil war became the first direct engagement of the Cold War between the communists and the rest, and it left Greece more devastated and divided than any nation in Europe. By 1950, 5 years after peace and reconstruction had begun elsewhere, most of Greece was a ruin, paralyzed by its own feuds. Only now are the Greeks even beginning to forget their bitter recent past. "20 years after their liberation from the Germans, they dared to celebrate that liberation officially for the first time last year. There was a hint of national reconciliation, as every political faction of Greece joined George Papandreou, the new Greek Prime Minister, in this celebration. The communists had destroyed Papandreou's first government when he returned from wartime exile to take over from the retreating Germans. And it took him these 20 years to win effective power again. Now, for the moment, he is a hero. An old man who's trying to turn the thoughts and actions of the young to the future instead of to the past. Here, perhaps, are the new Greek heroes. Young government planners and economists who've been educated abroad and have returned now with the swords of modern technocracy in their hands to slay the old dragons of Greek history and poverty. For the fiercest dragon of all, they look first at Athens.
Athens is the prime example of inequality. A bloated town. It contains more than a quarter of the population, about 2/3 of the wealth, something like 4/5 of all energy consumption. It contains all the ministries of state, something like 100,000 civil servants, something like 40,000 bank employees, practically the whole of the middle class. It contains a huge service sector which employs the population drawn in from the countryside. Now these people come and can't find proper industrial employment, and hence they are employed in services that are entirely unproductive. If you look at it statistically, it looks great, because the proportion of services goes up with national wealth. But in our case, services means effective unemployment, unproductive employment. Now Athens is a town that has grown far beyond what it should have in order to provide food for the rest of the country. Now it absorbs far more than it gives. Hence, a major task of policy will be to remove productive capacity, and above all, people taking decisions from this huge administrative center and take them to the parts of the country where they will need to take decisions on the spot and revitalize all the other towns in the economy which have been drained of talent.
That's the planners' hope, but it means a complete reversal of established patterns. Throughout this century, Athens has been sucking the rest of Greece into its maw. Now, with 2.5 million people, it's noisy, disordered, and still a village at heart. A century ago it was a village, and a half-Turkish village at that, and it still lives in a... The sprawl grows faster every year, in a vicious circle of rural unemployment, urban inflation, and old-fashioned political power.
Now, unemployment means that people depend on the political process to find jobs. Hence, you have patronage. On the other hand, the politicians in a democratic system have to get re-elected. So, automatically, you find the politicians really looking for opportunities to exercise patronage. The result is that our democracy is really what you had in Britain in the 18th century. A huge rotten borough in which politicians and people depend on one another to keep the rotten borough going.
And so the crowds from all over Greece gather outside every ministry in Athens, hammering at the doors of power. Even the Prime Minister himself is besieged, for he is the ultimate source of power. Everybody's looking for his man, his brother if he's lucky, or his cousin, or a friend of a friend of a friend. We might call this misgovernment. Some would even call it anarchy. For many Greeks, it's democracy. The democracy of the village, to which at heart they still belong. And with neither family nor friend in these bewildering offices, the inevitable refuge for most people is their member of parliament. Every MP's office is jammed with his constituents. Even when he's a minister like this one, he can't keep them out. They crowd even upon his confidential talks with the petty problems they brought him from the other end of Greece.
These problems are personal sometimes, but very often, and that's so much more gratifying to hear, general problems, such as, Mr. Minister, what will you do about the road to our village? We're only half an hour away from the main road, and yet we have to go on mule up there. But of course, they could very well just submit a memorandum to the Ministry of Public Works. But if they come to me, and I probably take it up on a high level with my colleague of Public Works, perhaps that road will be done a little quicker. And there again, not that the Greek state doesn't want to do it, but there are so many other similar roads or other things for the Minister of Public Works to do, that, well, it will help. I think it's understandable.
How many of these things do you find you can do for them?
Now, of course, I'm always speaking about the people coming from my electorate area, which are not more than, I'd say, about 50% of the visitors. I'll come to the others. Now, speaking of these, well, I'd say not very much, not very much.
An MP in Greece is like a faith healer. His constituents come for the laying on of hands. If even a minister can't really do much for them, a young opposition MP like this one can do less. But belief in the personal source of power remains. And he must work in a turmoil of personal pleas and argument. From officials, these people expect nothing. But from their MP, the unemployed seek work, the sick seek a bed in hospital, and the students pester him to persuade their professors to give them better marks in their exams. His office is a surgery for the victims of a broken-down bureaucracy and a society that has outgrown most of its institutions. In the ministries, the crowds are often frustrated when the man they want to confront isn't there. Indifference or inefficiency or just bureaucratic inflation prolong every transaction. Try posting a parcel, for example, from Athens to a foreign address. There's only one post office you can do it from for a city of 2.5 million people. If you have a morning to spare, you might manage it. If not, don't try. Here, even influence doesn't get you anywhere. Patience is the only refuge. It's not that Greek civil servants don't work. Often they do 3 different jobs in the day just to earn a decent living. And it's not that there aren't enough of them. There are usually far too many, but they're often not the right kind. They've got the job because they need it and knew someone who could give it to them. Nepotism is one way of disguising unemployment. To wait is the public's inevitable lot. To be underpaid is his, as we're told by one of the leading newspaper publishers in Greece.
I mean, one wonders, for most of the civil servants, one wonders how they manage to live at all. How they live, how their existing conditions are really miserable. I mean, it's, the pay of the civil servant in Greece is something not to be talked about. It's certainly underdeveloped. And there are too many, of course.
So the vicious circle returns to the politician, who's often not only civil servant, but father figure as well. One highly respected MP from Crete described it like this.
The individual politician has to have a certain amount of money to do politics. And it depends. Others spend more, others spend less. Insofar as I'm concerned, I estimate to spend about 20,000 drachmas, that is about $700 per month, in order to meet the demands of my constituency. For example, every wedding or every baptism that I perform costs me about $30. We also perform another function. We are the godfathers of many, many children, and we also are the best men for our constituency. For example, during the last 3 years, I estimate to have been the godfather of about 700 children. This, of course, is at a tremendous personal cost, because all these functions are paid by the political boss. You will now ask me perhaps why I'm in politics, since a politician does not receive more than about 400 drachmas per month. $400 per month. Primarily in Greece, politics play such a significant role that a lot of people go into politics because the society is geared towards political discussions and politics in general.
But politics often means only talk. Action needs to be organized. And for these people, organization is just what's missing. Another minister of government summed it up like this.
The biggest obstacle for the Greeks today is the lack of democratic organization at every level of social responsibility. Factory, farm, local government, national government, parliament, decisions are taken in the absence of the majority of people that are involved.
There are some Greeks, though, who make their own decisions. They are the rich of Greece, elegant, international, and often very rich indeed. If power is money, these people have it. They don't wait in anyone's office, and if they post a parcel, they send a servant. Some such people make their money abroad, and some of them keep it and spend it abroad. They look as if they live on another planet from the Greek peasants, in another world from underpaid civil servants. But do they? In the last 10 years, ordinary Greeks, peasants and civil servants, like ordinary people all over the world, have also begun to learn how rich life might be. The camera shows them a vision. And even if it doesn't always seem attainable, it stirs hope and even expectation.
Την πρώτη σκάλα, περίμενε να δω. Κατέβασε λίγο το πόδι, λίγο λοξατικά.
With these techniques, the dreams of a richer future for everyone are made more insistent. The hardships of present poverty less bearable.
Λοιπόν, έτοιμη. Λίγο λοξά το χέρι. Πλησίασέ τη στο πρόσωπο. Χαμογέλα. Όχι έτσι. Χαμογέλα.
Possessions and property for the rich are an investment in mental security. They carry none of the risks of industrial enterprise. So rich money goes into real estate or the bank, and the savings of poorer people are converted into gold. Gold, after all, has been good since King Midas. Greek money's been stable only for 10 years. Centuries of war and invasion, oppression and revolution have shaken Greek confidence. And who can blame them? At the end of the Civil War, only 15 years ago, it cost 30 trillion drachmae just to buy a bus ticket. Greeks have learned in their troubles to value the quick turnover. They've become great merchants and notorious gamblers. But long-term investment in anything but gold or property implies more faith in the future than history has taught them to display. Take the parable of the three brothers who assembled a car called the Farmobile. It's the only motor vehicle made in Greece, and its success so far is a triumph of the clever, mercantile Greek mind over the perhaps solider virtues of the captains of industry. The brothers imported a German engine and a German chassis and put them together in a shed. They offered the result to a bank as security for a loan and built some more on the proceeds. Then they sold the lot to Chrysler for a sum reputed to be at least $1 million. Today, the American firm, one of the biggest car makers in the world, produces 5 Farmobiles a day, more or less by hand. And it can't even sell those in Greece at the moment because the tax laws don't permit it. Meanwhile, the three brothers are off to pastures new. They're said to have put their money into hotels. No doubt it's safer. Greek insecurity has still another aspect. The belief that all the world's a great conspiracy against them. All nations suffer these illusions from time to time, especially when they're emerging from a period of oppression like Greece. But the Greek imagination seems particularly fertile of suspicion. Every coffee shop is a hothouse of gossip and rumor. The Prime Minister's own son returned recently from 20 years in America to find these attitudes unchanged.
It is a very predominant attitude in Greece to attempt to attribute to others what befalls them. This may be related, of course, to our past, the Turkish occupation of 400 years or so. It may have other deeper explanation, I do not know. But it is a fact that the Greek typically, and that includes myself, does not admit guilt too easily. In fact, I don't think I have met any other nationality that is so guilt-free as the Greeks are.
I think it's the Greek imagination. In fact, I very often get into great discussions about it. I'm quite of your opinion that most Greeks do see sort of shadows and mystery and, well, a sort of James Bond stories behind all the events. I don't believe it. I think that we are getting very much all right, and that there is no mystery, and that where we don't manage to work, it's because it's more or less our fault. I don't think it's anybody else's fault. If you ask me, I mean...
Can you persuade other Greeks to accept that they are really responsible for their own destiny?
Certainly not.
A gloomy conclusion. But the idea of conspiracy in Greece is sometimes quite extraordinary. These two men are collecting from a bank 15 different sets of question papers for the national examination in higher education. Now, such is the usual depth of suspicion in Greece and the accustomed influence of patronage that in the past nobody's really believed that exams of this importance could be conducted fairly, without cheating or favoritism. So last year, the government tried to make them absolutely foolproof for the first time.
Σήμερα εξετάζονται οι υποψήφοι της ομάδος Α.
In a broadcast from Athens, a high official of the Ministry of Education was to announce on the morning of the examination which of the 15 sets of papers would be chosen. In the 31 main districts of Greece, the schools and school teachers waited upon the voice from Athens.
Παρακαλώ τους κύριους Προέδρους των τοπικών επιτροπών.
In the Ministry of Education, there was a lottery, supervised by a committee, selecting one set of papers from the 15 taken that morning from bank safes all over Greece.
Και εκκληρώθη ο αριθμός 7.
Number 7.
Επαναλαμβάνω, εκκληρώθη ο αριθμός 7.
Paper number 7 was opened in all 31 districts of Greece, and the exam began. Every precaution was taken to prevent cheating on the spot. All handbags had to be left outside. This time, for the first time, merit alone would decide the results. There'd be no room for patronage, no controversy, no conspiracy. There'd be no reason for the failures to go running to their MPs afterwards to scream that they'd been robbed. The secrecy beforehand had been rigorous. The invigilation now was intense. Only the truth could prevail. The marking was scrupulously impersonal. No examiner knew whose paper he was correcting, and great pains were taken to prevent any examiner knowing what marks his colleagues might be awarding. Each question was marked by 2 different examiners, and each examiner covered up his own mark before passing the paper on. The marks were only uncovered again and compared when all the examiners had finished. And only then was the candidate's identity revealed. This was examining reduced to the most impersonal level that anyone could devise. And in the last and most impersonal device of all, the results were fed into a computer to determine finally which of the candidates had passed and which had failed. It seemed inconceivable that any human failing could have distorted these results. And so it was. The students who failed accepted the human element all right. This time, they blamed the computer instead and went off to lobby their MPs about this new conspiracy. For many of those who passed, Athens University was the likely destination, a classical establishment of outdated learning, where what matters most is jumping through the old examination hoops. There are only 2 universities in Greece, Athens and Saloniki, and they share 40,000 students. A degree at either may be a passport to power and influence, but it's unlikely to be an indication of advanced professional knowledge. Science, particularly, is a second-class study. Compared with the classics, the students are few, the equipment's antiquated, and the teachings out of date. To get anything better, young Greeks must go abroad, and they do, more than from any other nation in the world. There are 9,000 of them studying in foreign countries now, learning what their own schools can't teach them. Too many of them, perhaps, may never come back. At the heart of Greek education are still the classics and the law. Here are the numbers, here's the prestige, in a Byzantine tradition 1,000 years old. The law lectures at Athens are always overcrowded. But so, for that matter, are the schools everywhere. short of teachers, short of buildings, short of books, Greek education staggers under the historical burdens of neglect and prejudice. Only about 8 in every 100 Greeks have ever had any secondary education. 40 out of every 100 never finished their primary school. And universal free education has only just been achieved. For the new generation, the figures are far better. 20 out of every 100 of these children will go through secondary school. And the government's pressing on with a higher leaving age, a bigger budget, and plans for a new university to embrace the new studies that the old ones ignore. But it's still a struggle to assert present needs against the resistance of the past. Just now, there's only about one modern scientific school in Greece, where contemporary international standards are maintained. And that's here in the Doxiadis Institute of Technology, a private foundation that's become almost a fashionable finishing school among well-to-do students in Athens. It's the creation of one man with an international reputation as architect, planner, sociologist and businessman, and a low opinion of Greek education, Konstantin Doxiadis.
We have very little or no research at all in most of our faculties. And we know today that without research you cannot educate people to start opening their eyes into the future. Without research you train them only to look into what man has learned up to now. So we don't have research. We don't have postgraduate studies anywhere. And we know very well that unless you proceed to postgraduate studies, you cannot develop your leaders. Then we have a very small group of people which is keeping the control over the universities. Unless you follow exactly what they say and you believe in their own personal theories, you have no chance at all not to be elected a professor or a lecturer or an assistant, but even to be invited in any of the universities for a lecture for one evening. The control of small groups is complete. There is no chance at all to develop scientists as long as we follow this course. We need, therefore, badly other universities to be run by new, fresh groups of people, which do not have anything to do with the existing universities. University-level training is not enough, because we need badly reforms in our whole system of education down to the nursery school. Our present government started acting for the first time properly in this direction, but they have only taken the first steps.
Many of Greece's educational burdens are rooted here, in the ruins of Mystra, the old Byzantine center of medieval Greece. The Greek Ministry of Education is still today the Ministry of Religious Affairs as well, and much of Greek learning is traditionally church learning, the sterile grammar of a decayed Byzantium. For over 1,000 years, church, state and school have been intertwined. The church was the nation's glory. Its decorations were the country's living art when classical Athens was in ruins and the ancient sculptures were lost and forgotten. The church still lives, a powerful expression of the Greek past, a perpetual reminder of the glories of Byzantium that still enmesh Greek character like a golden but twisted thread. Gorgeous, oriental, secretive, and obscure. If the old doors are closing on the Byzantine past, what new ones are opening on the Greek future? The answer for the Greeks is the gateway to Europe. They want to crash the economic barriers and join the common market. The man who negotiated the agreement in 1962 to take Greece into Europe speaks as much like a prophet as an economist.
There was a deeper thought behind all this. Joining a unified Europe meant joining the currents of history, or rather rejoining the currents of history, and bringing back again Greece into the main streams which shape history.
But can prophetic visions overcome social realities? Is this really going to be the Greek future? Efficient and orderly and absolutely modern, like this little nuclear reactor outside Athens? Greece has left herself only 10 years before her industry must become fully competitive in the common market, on equal terms with France and Germany. And nearly 3 have gone already. Some of her progress is impressive. Her power plants multiply. Her rate of economic growth is one of the highest in Europe. Her ships are famous throughout the world. But the modern rule is that while the rich get richer, the poor seem to get poorer. And Greece in Europe still belongs to the poor. Most of her industries are still one-man handicrafts. Her incomes from farm and factory are among the lowest in Europe. She has brains and labor to spare, but little management or money. Her people are intensely self-aware and critical, but not very disposed to cooperate for common goals. To join the common market is a national race against time.
I think our biggest problem today is the race we have to become a full member of the common market within a relatively short period. We have 10 years about in which to develop our industrial base, our managerial elite, our skills, to modernize our economy and to some extent our society, so that we may survive in the Western community that we have chosen to join.
Andreas Papandreou, the Prime Minister's son, knows how difficult the race may be. An academic economist of international standing, he gave up American citizenship to take a key ministry in his father's cabinet and apply his theories to reforming Greece.
The great difficulty that I find, first, is that to actually proceed scientifically about the solution of an economic problem requires information. Information gathering requires time, and politics does not give you the time you need. I might add one more thing, that the political factor in a decision weighs much more heavily than I had thought. There are many occasions a choice as to where an investment will go. Should it go to Athens? Should it go to Epirus or to Peloponnesus? May not be solved on scientific grounds, as one might have wished, in terms of the long-term national interest. It may, on occasion, maybe too often, be solved on the grounds of the political power of those regions, the way they're represented in Parliament, how effective the spokesmen are, and the like.
Having just come back from some 20 years or so in America, how do you find you can apply American standards of efficiency in what seems to us like an oriental state of inefficiency?
I think it is rather difficult, and probably the key to this difficulty is the inability to effectively delegate power. What happens if you attempt to delegate a task to someone is either one of two things. In the one case, you may be somewhat afraid to do more than he should and cross you. Accordingly, he brings back to you all the problems that you had hoped he would solve. In the other case, he decides that he cannot only carry out the tasks, but at the same time, he can set the rules, the standards, the framework within which he will settle his problems, which can be quite different from yours. This puts one in the great difficulty of having to do all things himself, or take the risk of having them done in a way which is inconsistent with his objectives. This seems to me to be the crux of the efficiency problem in Greece, and the main difficulty in the transfer of efficiency Western style to the Greek context.
3 weeks after this interview, Andreas Papandreou was forced to resign. But the young planners are still there, still hoping and believing they can slay the old dragons. Maybe they can win the race to give Greece a new future, with new work and new industries, and a new sort of society that will enable her to rejoin that elusive mainstream of history that she parted company with 2,000 years ago. If so, it will change the face of Greece as it's never been changed before. If not, Greece will change anyway, because the emigration will go on. A hemorrhage that's bleeding the country to death. The young men will leave, as long as the old ways stay. Other worlds will beckon, while the old isolation persists. If no one opens new doors to the future, Greece might one day, not far off, be little more than a tourist museum on the fringe of Europe. An underdeveloped nation with an overdeveloped history. A place that others go to for their pleasure, but that Greeks are forced to leave for their life.